If you would open your Bibles to Revelation. We're going to finish up chapter 1, doing the questions, and then we'll go into chapter 2. So just kind of using David's phrase, some nuts and bolts to consider. This is not intended to be arrogant, but I sound a little hot. I'm hearing myself a little loud. You might bring it down a little bit. So we had the system for whatever reason was really loud this past Wednesday. So we did some tweaking on it. So the guys in the booth will have to make some adjustments as we go. We have a hearing assist system installed. So that means we have new receivers. So if you have to have a hearing device that you would prefer to put in your ear, like an earbud or something, we have those. But we also now have it for your cell phones. So I've got a card back there that tells you how to get on the church's Wi-Fi, the app to download, and then how to get into the app so you can connect to the stream. It works pretty good. I've tested it with my earbuds. It worked with Dale's hearing aids, but he could also hear it through his phone. So a little glitchy there on his part. Chuck, I think, got it working fine straight through his. I think John as well. The benefit to it, if you have to wear if you do the hearing assist, whether it's through there or through your phones, if some soft voice speaks from over there and the mic picks it up, you'll stand a greater chance of hearing it now than you would if you're like way over there. So the mics will pick it up and bring it into the hearing assist system. And basically like the stream. It's the same audio source we use for the stream, we use for that. So there might be a few little bugs when we first try it. Again, I used it with earbuds, not hearing aids, so I don't know how much difference there would be between the two of them. So we'll see and tweak it as we go along. Okay, with that being said, let's do it this way. I'm going to give Kevin number 2, if you would. Lead us in a word of prayer, please. All right, so let's real quick go through the questions from chapter 1. So, who bore witness to the Word of God and the testimony of Jesus Christ? That's right, his servant John. That's right, the way he refers to himself there. To whom was the Church of Revelation written? Yeah, or the 7 churches of Asia. That's right. Huh? Now, she said Church of Asia. So there's 7 of them. You say Church of... Did I say Church of Revelation? Do you need the hearing assist device? I need the speaking assist device. You know, have you heard about this new chat AI stuff they're developing? Okay. I refuse to use AI. I'm going to stand along on I. Never mind. I'll go back to AI then. Number 3, who will see Jesus when he comes again? Every eye. And who else does it specifically say? Everyone who pierced him. Everyone who pierced him. Whom did John say would mourn? All the tribes, all the men of earth. Where was John when he received the revelation of Jesus Christ? Yeah, the island called Patmos. When John turned to see the voice, what did he see? And for this, just give the first part of verse 13 where you find the answer. That's right. 7 golden lampstands. And then if you wanted to write the rest of the next 3 verses in, there's not enough space there. But that's right, 7 golden lampstands, and then everything else would go along with that. What went out of the mouth of the Son of Man? Don't be afraid. I was looking for a sharp 2-edged sword. But he also would say, don't be afraid. And then what did the 7 stars represent? That's right, the angels of the 7 churches. And we'll talk a little bit about the idea there, different options there. Okay, so any questions or comments about that? Okay, there it is right in front of me. So now we start with chapter 2, as it's divided up for us. Chapter 2, the book of Revelation. So I have updated the map so the locations are a little bit more visible. You've got the red dots represent where the cities are, and then you can see the letter in a lot bigger than before. So the first church we're going to be looking at, the first letter, if you would, is to the church at Ephesus. You'll notice a couple of things, and there's some interesting background, detailed information on Ephesus. But Ephesus was near the coast here. And you'll notice that Smyrna would be a little bit closer there. But if we've got a coastal city, what would have been one of the greatest, not greatest, but what would have been a challenge for Christians in the first century living in these cities? What was the primary religious practice? What did they worship? Yeah, they worshiped the Greek gods, very heavily into idolatry. I mean, you think about it for a moment. When you travel through our country, depending on where you go, could be down south, could just be through Edmond, Oklahoma. Think about the number of churches you see, the number of church buildings, and the wide variety. Now, imagine if you lived in a world where you saw the same thing, but they all worshiped false gods. Okay? And you worship the one true God. And so when you walk through the cities, everywhere you would see these practices. And the thing about idolatry, and the Old Testament writers kind of talk about them worshiping a stone, worshiping a wood, there's nothing there to it, is that you're trying your best to appeal to make these imaginary gods happy. And it ends up becoming a form of manipulation. It ends up allowing you to do things that maybe you wouldn't really consider doing, or a justification of things. And so for a Christian living within these areas, it would be a great challenge. Think about Paul's instructions to the brethren in Corinth, or the other cities where the pagan practices were engaged in. A lot of times in these temples were sexual immorality being engaged in as a form of worship of these false gods. And so here he's sending these 7 letters, one to each church located here on this map. 7, we've talked about kind of, why 7, why not the other 2 or 3 churches that we see found within the scriptures, why just the 7. We've talked about kind of the potential meaning behind that, or what the imagery there indicates. Any thoughts or comments about this? Let's go to Mary and then Debbie.
I hadn't thought about this before, but I thought it was interesting when you studied history how the Lord brought Jesus in at this time, because the Greeks, Alexander kind of got everybody on the same page. This whole area, everybody was on the same page with the language, so they could facilitate trade. And then the Romans connected them with the roads. I mean, they still have those roads. They were so good.
Right.
But he kind of set it up, and I'd never thought about it before, but the fact that they had the religion of many gods made them acceptable to these new people that came in with their own gods, because not every society was like that. I mean, if they'd gone to Islam or to the Aztecs or to even Christians and tried to bring in another god, it wouldn't work. But this was set up, and it also was realizing their gods had feet of clay. I mean, the Romans and the Greeks both realized their gods were not perfect gods.
Okay.
So I never thought about the religious area that he started this Christian movement was set up ideally to learn the truth. And then he also made these Jews leave their comfortable spot, which we need to think about, because they had to go somewhere that wasn't like them. And we tend to want to stay where we're at in our comfortable zone instead of getting out there and helping other people learn the truth.
Okay, all right. Good points, good thoughts. Any other thoughts or comments? Okay, appreciate that, Mary. All right, so let's go ahead and read. We're going to right now look at the letter to the church there in Ephesus. That's what we see in verses 1 through 7. And let's go ahead and we're just going to read the first 3 verses. It's not a good break, but we'll read these 3 and talk about it. So to the angel of the church in Ephesus write, he says, "These things says he who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, who walks in the midst of the 7 golden lampstands. I know your works, your labor, your patience, and that you cannot bear those who are evil. And you have tested those who say they are apostles and are not, and have found them liars. And you have persevered and have patience, and have labored for my name's sake, and have not become weary." So we already saw in chapter 1, and this was part of the questions we were discussing earlier, when John turned around, what did he see? Well, when you go back and read those 3 or 4 verses where it describes what John saw, I should say, keep those vision things, what John saw in mind, because when he writes to each church, he's going to reference it. He's going to reference back to each one in one form or fashion. For instance, kind of give a couple examples there. He says, "The words of him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, who walks among the 7 golden lampstands." We'll go back to chapter 1, verse 16. We see this. "In his right hand he held 7 stars. From his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face like the shining sun in full strength." So we have the first idea there, or him referencing his, in his right hand he held the 7 stars. And it was he who walked among the 7 golden lampstands. If we look ahead to the letter to the church in Smyrna, just one more example. There in verse 8, "The words of the first and the last who died and came to life." Well, he referenced that in chapter 1, verses 17 and 18. He says, "I fell at his feet as though dead." He says, "Fear not, I am the first and the last, and the living one. I died, and behold, I'm alive forevermore." And so what he does here, as Jesus dictates these letters to John, is that he keeps looking back to the very image he showed John. And it helps to add a reinforced idea behind the authority of the message and the one from whom this message had come. Any thoughts or any comments about that? All right, a couple other things here real quick. I forgot to silence my phone earlier. Now, something else to consider here with this. There are several commendations. And when I say commendations, we know the Lord knows our works, right? We know the Lord sees everything we do. And many times, and this is what makes these 7 letters very significant and our understanding of how the local church worked, is this. Many times we think about God watching us. We think about it on a very individual level. God watches me when I'm at home. He always knows my heart, my thoughts, my mind, and everything. Omnipotent, everywhere that we go, if we're down in the depths of the sea, if we're up in the sky, wherever we are, our Heavenly Father sees us. But this section of this letter, or this book of Revelation, tells us that God does view the local congregation as well. Now, the reason why I stress this is that many times it would be easy to look through the book of Acts and the subsequent letters that were written, especially by Paul, and say, okay, Christians came together and formed a local congregation, and they did the work of the Lord. But the local church wasn't really as important as the individual Christian. But you find that's not the case whatsoever, because the local congregation was established with elders or overseers to help guard the flock, to help feed the flock, to help us as individuals be the strong Christians that we're supposed to be. Now, many times we do talk about the difference between what an individual Christian can do as far as the work goes and what the local church can do. One example would be if there was a widow indeed with no one to take care of her, the church could take care of her. But if she had someone to take care of her, then the church could not take care of her. So kind of a difference. So another thing would say, I could kiss my wife and you can't kiss my wife. You know, not everything the local church can do, not everything the individual can do, can the local church do. But what we find, though, and here's the point, is the purpose of the local church is kind of several facets there. To make known the manifold wisdom of God, to be the pillar and ground of truth community. But it is designed to help you and me be more faithful to God when we are not assembled together. That's why we don't do well, let's put on our go to church clothes, and then when we go home, we go back to a life where there's a lot more toleration of things that are wrong. But as long as we're here in the building, we govern the things that we say and we do. What we do collectively in its work is designed to help us as individuals be strong in the Lord. Again, think about Ephesians chapter 4, 11 through 16. We've talked a lot about that. So my point is, when the Lord looked upon the church at Ephesus, did he see the individual Christians? Yes. Okay. He was judging the individual Christians as well, observing them. The church in, Sardis, I believe it was, who he said, some of you have not yet soiled your garments. Meaning he recognized there were some who were faithful and some who were not. Okay. But with all that being said and done, this tells us that he does look at the work of the local church. He sees that work. Okay? And he holds in judgment that local congregation. What I found interesting, and we may talk about this as we go through these 7 churches, the 5 that he found problems with, he did not say to them, now those who have not soiled your garments, you leave this heathenistic, weak bunch of Christians and go start another church. He put the responsibility of fixing the problem on everybody, even those who weren't the problem. Do we ever see in our study of the Old Testament prophets, do we ever see a prophet who was fundamentally right before God, but when he went to God on behalf of the people, he prayed as if he was part of the problem, seeking forgiveness, seeking guidance? Nehemiah, if memory serves correctly. Ezra also. So we take from this that yes, what the local church does is incredibly important. And so as we'll find through here, that you could have a congregation who from the external appearance does everything right. Consider these people. He says, I know your works, I know your labor, I know your patience, and that you cannot bear those who are evil. The English Standard Version renders what we just read as follows. I know your works, your toils, and your patient endurance, and how you cannot bear with those who are evil, but have tested those who call themselves prophets and are not, found them to be false prophets. So here he says that you cannot bear those who are evil, and you have tested those who say they're apostles and are not. The reason why I connected the two is that the ESV makes the connection there. You know, you cannot bear those who are evil. What are you doing about it? You're testing them. All right, so I'm not sure which way would be the more accurate rendering, the ESV or the New King James Version. But the point is, did they stand up to error? Did they stand up to these people trying to claim to be apostles when they were not? Well, the question is yes. They examined them, much like what John would write in John chapter 4, verse 1 John 4:1, where he says, test the spirits, try the spirits. So there is a responsibility on the part of the local church to work, to labor, to patiently endure, to not give in to evil and to those who would attempt to say that God has spoken to them and then lead you away. He expects us to stand up to that. He expects us to test the things and weigh the things. That's like any time that anyone stands up here and preaches a sermon or teaches a class, in the back of your mind should always be not suspicion, but paying attention to what is said just in case I say something that's not right. Like the churches of Revelation. You know, little slip up of the tongue. But what if it wasn't a slip up? That one was. But what if it wasn't? What if I was trying to slip in an understanding that's not according to Scriptures? And if no one catches it, then I know I did good. I got away with it. But if someone catches it, oh, well, I just messed up. A little slip of the tongue. And so we have to always be comparing what is preached and what is taught to what the Bible teaches, to what Jesus and the apostles taught, drawing the right conclusions that he intended for us to draw, not drawing from it with man's wisdom some other meaning or idea behind it. So this church, these brethren, were doing a good job. And it says, and you have persevered and have patience and have labored for my name's sake and have not become weary. Think about the congregations that you have been with. If you're visiting, for those who are members here, think back to your life and the congregations have you been with. Would you be able to say about every congregation that they fit this great praise of God? You might know of cases in the past where you observed and might have even spoken up and were ignored about things not happening the way that they should. Now, the reason why I kind of emphasize all that is to show that just because we're doing everything right and we have all the great external appearances and we really are standing up for the truth, it doesn't always guarantee that we're still right with God. And that's a strong lesson they're about to learn as we continue forward. Any questions or any thoughts about this? Arthel and then Debbie. I skipped you a while ago, didn't I? Yeah. I didn't like what you were going to say. So, my apologies. Go ahead, Miss Debbie.
I want you to clarify something that you stated just a few minutes ago because it hits me at the end pretty hard. You said that we should just leave the congregation. I do think there is times that you need to leave. But go ahead, could you clarify that?
Yeah, because that's not exactly what I said. What I said was when you looked at the 5 of the 7 churches, he never told the ones who had not yet sold their garments to leave and go start another work. Okay. My point is they were held accountable to resolve the problem, just like everybody else was. Sometimes, and I don't disagree with what you're saying, you have to stand for the truth. And it may be that at some point you say, this has gone on too long. And I can't do this any longer. They won't listen. I've tried to talk. Here's the scriptures. They blatantly ignore it. Can I even continue walking in fellowship with them? You know, you have to come to that conclusion. And God knows the hearts and the motivation. But many times that is a quick answer to it. Well, I don't like what's going on, so I'm going to go somewhere else. Okay. If there's an actual scriptural problem and you're part of the body, you need to do your best to try to help fix something. I'm not the problem. I know you're not. You know, let's say for the sake of argument, I was to fall and break this arm. All right. So this one would have to pick up the slack. But what if this arm says, it's not my problem. I didn't break it. I don't have to do anything, you know. So that was the point, is that we need to work together to solve the problem. That was more the takeaway as I intended from that. Mary and then Arthel.
I think there's two things we can look at personally to see how we should be in this, because the key factor is love. If we have a child that we think is erring, we don't say, see you later, we're out of here. We stay and we try to teach that child. And if you love your family, that congregation, you try to stay and help them. That is what you do. That's what Paul did. Paul persevered with the Jews. They're the ones that thrust him out. He didn't leave them high and dry. He tried to teach them. He got booted out. God took him out. He didn't leave by choice. He wanted to convert them. It was in his heart all the time to try to teach them, even when they were gone. Even when he was out of their midst, he prayed for them because he loved them. That's what a parent does with a child. And that's what we should do with our brethren. We should love them. And if they're arrogant, we have to pray for them. And if they do this out, we have to leave. Or if we have to expel them because they're hurting other members of the church, that's the fact. Whether
Right.
it's a child, a beloved child, or someone you don't love as much as your child. Love is the key.
That's right.
It's like divorce. If you love someone and they break your heart and you love them, you're going to try to make it work if you can.
Yeah.
If you can't, there's a time where you can.
Romans 16:17 really nails down the purpose of what you're talking about being for the good of the congregation, you know. And that's a good point. Good point there. All right, Dale.
When you go back to your map and you show that John did on the Isle of Patmos, and you showed the 7 churches that he was writing to, what came to my mind was, how did they get the letter? Or, every time you go to the different churches, you say to the angel.
Yeah.
Ephesus, Smyrna. So was it a physical delivery, or was it the angel telling them this is what they need to do?
That's a good question. Any other questions? The word angel, the Greek word angel, also can mean messenger. Okay. So I really believe, my personal opinion, and I'll say it like this, is that they were hand delivered. You know, whether they were hand delivered by John when he was finally released from exile, or if there were individuals who visited John and then they took the letters, you know. I'm still wishy-washy on if it's supposed to be if it's supposed to use the term angels, to the angel of the church, or if it's supposed to be to the messenger of the church. A lot of translations still render it as angel, which means the translators strongly lean towards the idea of it being to the angel of, which then opens up a whole nother question. Does each local congregation have a representative angel for the Lord? Now that may be extrapolating too much, you know. That tends to, I mean, that's the way the translators render it, you know, as angel. But again, like I said, the word does mean messenger also, and angels were messengers of God. But it could have also meant the physical messenger who would take it. But I don't know about that one. And we're trying to stay out of a can of worms, and I've already got it half full this morning. Right? Okay. All right, let's see. Any thoughts, any comments about this?
Probably what it says angel, messenger.
Yeah. It's going to have a lot to do with how many times the word lego is the Greek word used there. How many times that word, that's not the word. Sorry, wrong word, anglios. How many times that word is translated as like angel, like 179 times in the King James translation, anglio is translated as angel, and only 7 times messenger. So you'd have to, you know, a lot of times it's based on what the more scholarly minded folks view the context of it as. David.
Chapter 1 stated emphatically that John was in the spirit of the process of this. So as the apostles worked in the flesh, the spirit revealed. John's working in the spirit, these heavenly deliverance, and these messengers are revealing to him in order to write. We wouldn't know anything about this had it not been written. If you separated yourself from this 2,000 years later, you would have no idea had we not read it here.
Right.
It was meant to be written and delivered. It was necessary to understand the messenger portion because this is a heavenly vision. Apocalypto is revelation, not with an S, singular.
Right.
Is being made known to John via the Lord's messengers. He's receiving it that way. The churches would receive it the way we're receiving it today.
Okay. And how do we know that the messengers, the deliverers, were important. They were part of what he saw, the 7 stars in the hands of the one. That's not simply some carrier. There's just a significance to that. Yeah, it's a good point. Brian.
Going back to love, I think it's very enlightening. All the things he lists that they were doing good, those are big things. Very important things. But when it boils down to it, me and Haley were talking about this morning about love, and how when you love someone, you're very forgiving of them. And when you love somebody, those people will mess up in your life. And there's friends that will abandon you. They won't let that go because they don't really love you. And there's people at church that may never really, if you invest all your time in them and they don't really love you, then if you do something that they don't like, then they may cut you off. But we were talking about how your family doesn't do that, because your brothers, if I get in a fight with my brother, we're good the next day. He's going to forgive me because that's love. And that's my literal brother. And that's how I'm supposed to love everyone, is like my brother. And so, you can do all the good works in the world. You can do all these things that are good, but if you don't love, then it's pointless. And that is, like my mom said, when do you stop loving your child? Like at what point that they do wrong that you say, okay, I don't love you anymore, And I think we need to realize and remember, if you think about what is the consequence of love, you will realize that it is that forgiveness, it is that patience, it is that tenderness, it is that true caring about how to deal with somebody. There won't be anger in it. It'll be sincerity, and it'll shine through. And I think that is where you realize, okay, that's where I need God's grace to step in, because every one of us falls short, because we don't love the way we should. Yeah. I hate to say it, but there's a few people in here, that I love probably at the level I'm supposed to love, but there's a lot of people I don't, because I don't know them very well. I don't have that relationship, and that's what Jesus had. And it strikes me, when you read something like this. And if it wasn't for God's grace, I wouldn't be going to heaven.
That's right.
Because I don't match that love at the level I'm supposed to.
Well, think about that in context. 1 Corinthians 13, love bears all things, love believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. And he also says in his letter to the church of Colossae, he tells them to put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, bearing with one another, and forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, that's got a love in action in there. Yeah, it's a very good point. And Miss Diana.
It's not that I love them on a different level. I love the fact that they're here and that they're members of the church at the same time, that they have the same goals in mind, eternity. And so looking at it from that way, it might be easier to love those that we don't know, but also make the effort to get to know each other.
That's true. That's true. A lot of times the application of that love, I don't know if this is the right way of putting it, but I'll say it this way. When it's someone we don't know and we meet them for the first time, we may be less patient with them. But if they're a child of God and we know they're a child of God, then automatically everything we just read should apply in our behavior towards them, whether we're familiar with them or not. Now, I'd like to think I was in the first class of people Brian talked about, but I don't know, I might be in the second one. But I understand, very good points with all that. Jenny.
Like our sinners, or that we have tried really hard and we eventually have to walk away from.
like, especially when it's a difference of opinion, because you see people leave congregations, or like, I don't want to go there, I don't want to deal with them. It always kills me because we want to spend heaven with these people.
Yeah.
Like, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we want people to be saved. We should want, we're going to spend eternity with these people. Like, I don't understand why we give up on people, or we don't want to deal with them, but we're supposed to want to be in heaven with them forever. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
You're not wrong. I mean, it is heartbreaking a lot of times to see how simple of things ultimately will divide the relationship between brethren. Yeah. Boy, we're really on a different path. But a lot of this, though, is relevant because especially what we're about to hit in verse 4, okay? And I think this is a very broad spectrum problem, as we'll see here in a minute. Richard, and there was another one. Okay.
Circumstances to the family. Like Mary was saying, you don't stop loving your kids, but there could come a time when you have to say, you have to leave, and I cannot have you around. If you have other young kids at home, say, and your oldest gets a drug habit and starts bringing that into the home, you can't have that around the rest of the family.
Yeah.
And as heartbreaking as it is, you may have to say, you have to leave, and you can't come around.
Yeah.
In God's family, we don't do that unless the sin is something that is going to corrupt the rest of the congregation in some way. Then you have to deal with it. And that's the purpose for that discipline, is to prevent it from spreading and infecting the rest of the congregation.
Yeah. Now I'm at a point of clarification what you said. I agree with what you said. You're not talking about not dealing with the sin at all.
Right.
You're talking about in those cases where it finally is beginning to affect and lead others astray. The dealing with is Romans 16, 17, 18 that you're talking about. That's exactly right. If you know a brother's overtaken in a fault, you have a responsibility to go to him, spirit of gentleness. But you're dealing with this brother is affecting others. Like, and we're going to hit the one who he references, Jezebel was in their presence teaching the young men there about fornication and stuff. Yeah, it's got to be dealt with, yeah, in a loving way, but still. One more, Dad.
In regards to what Jenny was having to say, in those circumstances, every one of us should have that passion that she has, and that we all may do. The one thing that brings to mind when I hear that, and we are all falling short, is that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, and that helps me get through time like that.
It's a good point. All right, so we got just a few minutes remaining. I do want to pull us real quick around verse 4. Nevertheless, he says, I have this against you, that you have left your first love. Now, this is really a challenging statement. It would be different if he made this statement to like the church at Sardis and Laodicea, But he says it to a congregation that carries all outward a semblance of what we would call sound or healthy congregation. But yet, it wasn't far enough. And we've talked about this before. One of the most frightening statements can also be the most comforting statements. And that is this: the Lord knows your heart. Okay? It can be frightening because if our heart's not right with him, he knows it. And we know it. Okay? But if our heart is right with him, and our heart is right in our service unto him, our heart's right, I should say, with God, then we also know that because we are fully aware of it. And so imagine these brethren reading this letter. You have left your first love. And then this is not some mild, you might have a problem here. I want you to work on this. Remember, therefore, from where you have fallen. Notice the terminology there. Repent and do the first works, or else I will come to you quickly and remove your candlesticks. He says they had fallen. Not drifted away a little bit, but fallen. Right.
Well, I think that I think what the point is, when you read the things they were doing good, he hits everything. They're being patient, they're enduring, they're suffering for God. They're testing apostles that are not apostles, but false teachers. They're not putting up with the, I keep saying Nickelodeons, but it's not, because that's a Disney Channel, but the Nickelodeons, the ones that were like living like Jezebel and stuff. So they're doing all these right. You know, what this says to me is, on the outside, they're doing all the works right. But what they're not doing right is they don't have what I said, and I'm not going to repeat it, but they don't have that love.
Yeah.
And so, who cares? You know, who cares that they're, you know, enduring to the end, and they're suffering for God, and they're, you know, testing the false teachers, and they're, you know, not putting up with the bad guys. You don't love, you ain't getting that lampstand. You know, like, that's the point. I think that that's the whole, it is irrelevant that they did it right.
Yeah.
It's irrelevant because they didn't have love. And I'm pretty sure in 1 Corinthians 13, he says, if you have all these things but you don't have love, what do you have? And so I think that's the point. I think his point is, if you don't have love, you don't have God. It's not, I mean, God is love. It is not about all these good works that you're doing in this aspect. If you don't have love, you're not, it's pointless.
Yeah. This love will yield what it's supposed to yield within our life. But if we have these things without love, then they're not 100% meaningless. I know why you said that, and I agree with that. Jesus acknowledged that they were there, and he praised them for it. But it didn't alter the fact that the greater issue was this. And without this, everything else they had done would not save them. And that's why he tells them to repent. Yeah.
In his life, if you love, everything else falls into place. But if you love, you will treat the people correctly.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't have a problem with how, you know, I treat my mom. You know, like, I'm patient with my mom. I'm forgiving. I love my wife. I have a problem with people that I don't love. And, you know, when we say, oh, we love those people even though we don't know them, maybe, but, you know, I mean, I don't. I mean, I'm not willing to die for people that I don't know. I mean, if I'm being honest, like, I hope I would, but...
It's a great challenge.
Yeah. I mean, and I know there's a lot of people here that aren't patient with everyone. You know, it's hard.
Yeah.
We got to be conscientious of that.
That's a good point. All right, let's plan to continue this next Lord's Day morning. We'll start with verse 4. We may spend a little bit of time talking about how, this idea of them living their first love. And we'll talk about the changes that he was talking about and the ramifications of not making the changes. So appreciate everybody's participation in the comments this morning.